I'll go first. Jim Goldman, co-founder of Cybersecurity, 25 or so years in cyber risk management, experience with FBI, cybercrime investigation, vice president of GRC for Salesforce, and really just a fan of cyber risk management in general. So when ISO 42001 and the NIST AI risk management framework and the EU AI Act came out, I just dove in head first and have started to help our customers with how do you do, risk assessment around AI.
Awesome. Hey everyone, Mark Rubinaccio here. I have about 12 years of experience in cybersecurity. Kind of kick things off in like a data center incident response role. That got me really interested in red teaming, penetration testing, vulnerability scanning. That's where my next role was. And then I eventually got into cybersecurity compliance, was a PCI DSS auditor for quite some time, audited against some other frameworks and acronyms that I'm sure you all have heard of. And now I've been with SecureFrame for about 4 years, building product to help organizations manage their GRC. And over the last couple of years, AI has gotten big. I've been working with a lot of our customers now that have AI implemented into their solutions to help them try and figure out a way to implement risk management and continuously monitor that risk management, which we'll be talking about during this webinar today.
So with all of our webinars, we like to make it very practical. We want people to leave the webinars actually knowing, to some degree at least, what next steps they would take, what concrete next steps they would take. We don't want it to feel like a college lecture, but rather like, hey, here's some practical information that you can put to good use right away. So for context, we're going to start by talking about AI risks in general and how to manage those. We're going to talk about the standards that are out there to help us in regards to this. And then we're going to get into more of a process thing, like how, from a practical standpoint, how would you get started? And then why would compliance to one or more of these standards help you as a competitive advantage? And this is for you, Mark. Go ahead, Jim, for the next slide.
Sounds good, Jim. Kind of kick us off and basically set the stage. As technology starts being implemented into society, we do see a rush or a race to try and implement a lot of that tech. Nobody wants to miss the boat on the next new greatest thing, and we're kind of seeing that in the realm of AI over the last couple of years, in terms of this like AI revolution that's happening. Organizations are implementing AI into the software, into the platforms that they've already previously built. We even see organizations starting new companies based off of AI, using generative AI to try and solve a new problem. And even if the organization is not implementing AI directly into their software, a lot of the users within that org are using AI to try and enhance or make more efficient their daily tasks with work. And that's all kind of what's happened over the last year is all these organizations are rushing to implement AI to make sure that they're using it to the best of their ability and they're keeping up with the new technology. And because of that, we're not really seeing a lot of regulatory like standards or practices today in terms of the use of that AI. It's kind of like the Wild West where organizations are spinning up AI for any service that they could possibly think of, starting new companies, onboarding users, taking a lot of data and processing that data. And there aren't really any sort of requirements around, what you can and cannot do with AI. But as we'll be talking about in our next few slides, that is going to be changing. And there are frameworks and things like that for you to be able to kind of kick off that process to determine if you're using AI in a ethical and effective way. So basically, due to the rush to implement AI, a lot of cybersecurity and privacy considerations are being overlooked, and proper due diligence in terms of how to implement AI and process data within those systems are being overlooked as well. And the reason for that is kind of generative AI organizations make it so easy to implement it into software. If I wanted to change one of the functions in my application to start using Gen AI, all I really have to do is connect an API and then start feeding that data to the generative AI tool, which will then just begin sending results back. And then users at my org can log into a website, start asking a generative AI some questions about the business processes, and it'll spin out results or content that can be used to help make that person's job more efficient. So it's really making it's very easy to implement, and because of that, harder to regulate versus slowing down the implementation. And a big issue with that is the results that are coming back from these generative AI tools can't be 100% accurate or trusted upon. And the reason for that is because a lot of these results are trained on previously used data or are based on the prompts that are being sent to these tools. And if there really isn't a lot of due diligence or research around how the AI should be used in the first place, the results that are coming back could be untrained, inaccurate, unfair, and biased, which could cause a lot of issues in the long run for these organizations. And not only that, a lot of the data with these Gen AI tools is not continuously updated. So a lot of the data that it's being trained on and the results you're being given is outdated inherently. And then how that AI kind of makes decisions for the data that's being sent back, it's hard to see exactly how those decisions are being made. These tools are not very transparent in how it's taking the prompted data, turning it into a result or an answer, and that makes it really difficult to kind of understand. Is the data coming back accurate? How do I determine if that's so? Because of that, and here's a graphic that kind of shows you all of the different specs and how it all relates to data and AI. And I'll kind of let Jim talk about the graphic a little bit here.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So it is that rush to AI that Mark referred to that really is the root cause of all the risks that are now apparent or inherent in the AI systems that are being developed. And what you see here, and Mark was referring to this, is any AI system really starts with data. Data is the foundation of these. And if the companies that maintain that data lake don't have the good data management best practices, and there are standards out there regarding that we won't go into today. But if they don't have data management best practices with data cataloging, eliminating data redundancy, concern about data quality, et cetera, then it's almost like don't pass go, don't collect $200, full stop. Don't move up the stack. You can't skip any of these layers, right? Yes, AI, effective AI, trustworthy and effective AI is at the top of the stack, but understand it is a stack and none of these steps can be skipped. You can't skip over the data privacy regulations that are required. You can't skip over the cybersecurity standards, and you have to use, best practices in terms of the AI systems development, so forth. The kind of the point that people miss, even if they're well intended and say, well, I want to develop an AI system that is in line with ISO 42001 or in line with the NIST AI risk management framework. You can't just jump to that. You have to start back down at the data with your data management best practices, data privacy regulations, cybersecurity standard, and then you're ready to layer on best practices in terms of AI systems development. That's really, if you get no other message from this webinar, that's, in my opinion at least, that's the most critical message to bring home from this. And so this is kind of, best case, worst case scenario. So if you were to follow that diagram that we just showed, and you started with, good data management practices, then these are the characteristics of the system that you'll end up with. You'll be compliant with regulations. You'll be able to prevent data tampering. Your system will be trusted. You'll be able to mitigate attacks, et cetera, et cetera. And then without going through that stack without starting with data management and incorporating cybersecurity and data privacy regulations. You have damage to your brand and reputation. With the EU AI Act, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, you'll end up with some pretty significant fines from the EU. I imagine, that there's a California AI Act that's in the works, just like California led the way with privacy regulations in the United States and other states followed. I'm sure there will be other AI type acts, with punitive, penalties as a result of not failing to meet standards. So, it's pretty straightforward. It's in everybody's best interest to follow that diagram that we said. Start with data management, include data privacy, include best practices in terms of cybersecurity, and then follow the SAFE frameworks for, comprehensive AI system development. Did you have anything to add, Mark, on that one?
Yeah, I think you covered it, Jim. Basically, like as we talked about in the graphic before and here, I mean, there's a lot of risks in regards to the implementation of AI, and we'll be talking about how to manage those risks. But a lot of those risks could also be helped mitigated through a lot of fundamental controls through privacy and cybersecurity regulations that you may already be following, and maybe you just don't have your AI system kind of involved in those best practices. So yeah, this is a list of off the top of our head, just like a bunch of different risks that you should consider as you implement and use AI.
So in terms of risk assessment, you can't fix what you're not aware of, right? And so the first step in risk management is a risk assessment. You have to know, well, what are the risks I'm dealing with in my particular situation for the AI system that I'm trying to develop. And so when you're trying to do an assessment, a risk assessment, you have to have some kind of gauge to measure those risks against. You have to have a framework. You have to have a set of best practices that you can, kind of go down that list of best practices and say, are we doing this at all? Or maybe a little, gee, we're not doing that at all, et cetera, et cetera. You need to be able to work your way down and compare those kind of best practices to what you're doing. So that's what we have over on the left there is, you need to choose which standard or framework is most appropriate for you. Mark's going to go into these in a little bit more detail later, so I won't do that now. The one thing I would point out is ISO 42001 is obviously an international standard that you can get certified to. The NIST AI risk management framework is just that. It's a framework of best practices. There's no certification, but it is very similar to ISO in that, it says, in our opinion, this is the best way to do this. The EU AI Act is different, all right? The EU AI Act is law. It says thou shalt do these things, and if you don't do these things, here's what's going to happen to you. So please understand that the EU AI Act is legislation. Yes, it puts out some best practices, many of which truthfully came from ISO 42001 or the NIST risk management framework, but understand that it is legislation. And so, how do you go about this, the risk assessment? Well, it starts with processes, and really it starts at the very top. What are you trying to accomplish? What's the use case? And what's your business justification? Once you do that, you really look at AI systems development as one long process. You could think of it as like a manufacturing process, a quality management process. Remember, the first ISO standard that really became well known, at least in my opinion, was ISO 9001, which is a quality management standard. And so really this is, picking up right where that left off. It's how do you develop AI systems in a quality manner? Well, the first thing you need to do is what's the overall development process look like? And then what are the roles? Who can touch that systems development process at any point in the process? You need to know what those people are, and then you need to be able to define the roles and responsibilities of each of those individuals in that process. So just understand we're trying to build a process a quality process, not only to develop that AI system, but to deploy that AI system and then to be able to monitor that AI system once it's out there and operational. And then, really in the monitoring part, what you have to be able to understand is, what does good look like? You have to be able to note exceptions. You have to have thresholds set for different types of activity so that you know when you're kind of out of bounds on those parameters. And I'll just say one other thing related to that last category about unacceptable, high, or limited in terms of the use of the AI. Those terms again come into play with the EU Act because it's legislation, it comes right out and says thou shalt not implement these types of functions in AI systems. And then it says, okay, if you want to do these functions, it's okay, but we consider those high risks, and therefore you need to implement these extra controls for those types of AI functionality. So just be aware. Risks fall into about 3 major categories, pretty self-explanatory. There's the operational risks. Bias is probably the biggest one you read about, bias and fairness, because you have to understand this AI system is giving you answers. It's making recommendations, all right? There's a lot of liability in having a computer make recommendations. And so you have to be very careful on the fairness and bias scale. The regulatory risks come into, do you even have the right to be using the data that you're basing your recommendations on? And then the second thing is transparency is a big deal. I think we may have called it traceability, that kind of thing. Again, the EU AI Act is very specific about logging requirements. Like, you need to know what, every question that was asked to your system, every recommendation that was made, how'd you reach that recommendation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not a thing where you could just throw an AI, if you're going to follow the standards and avoid risk. This is not a thing where you can just throw an AI system out there and start giving recommendations to people and think you're going to be okay. And obviously the reputational risk is self-explanatory. And then in terms of impact, I think everybody knows that risk equals impact times probability, right? And so, that's really how you want to gauge what are your critical risks, what are your high risks, what are your medium risks, what are your low or marginal risks, et cetera. So what could the impact be? What are the potential impacts that could happen? Well, certainly it'd be financial. Again, if you fall under regulation and you go sideways against the regulation, then understand there will be financial impacts to your enterprise. Probably the next big thing is reputational, right? And then the operational impact comes in that do you have the processes in place to monitor your AI systems, know when it's out of bounds? Do you have a way to handle the data privacy kind of inquiries and that type of thing? And, how do you manage it? Well, it starts, as we said, with the risk assessment, but then really, once you have the assessment, you know where your risks are, especially with ISO 42001, for instance. You have to have a very comprehensive risk mitigation or risk management program in place to say, yes, we identified these risks. Here's our plan on how to mitigate those. Here's how we're monitoring that risk mitigation plan, how we're tracking the progress on the things that we promise we do. So it's like, actually do the things you said you were going to do, document that, et cetera. That's good risk management. The other big thing with AI systems is you have to use threat modeling. Sometimes people call it kill chain analysis, that type of thing, where you need to put on your bad guy hat. You may want to employ red teams, or, I think there's going to be a new flavor of penetration testing for AI systems, where it's not necessarily penetration testing just in the classic sense of trying to break in and steal data, but it's like, can we unduly influence the recommendations that the AI system is giving. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, we discussed a lot about risk management, and I'm sure a few of those bullet points there looks pretty familiar. I mean, a risk management process in general, it is very similar in terms of first defining exactly what you're performing a risk assessment against. You need to determine what is the business use case of the service and define that specifically. And then bring in your stakeholders, right? Who's involved in developing, who's involved in using these services, and then kind of bring all of that together in terms of then identifying your risks. And those risk categories are very similar, whether we're talking about AI or if we're talking about general system services that you still need to perform risk assessments against. So that's where like we're kind of bringing in together ISO 42001, NIST AI RMF, EU AI Act, but then also there's like NIST best practices around how to perform a risk assessment in general. The quality, ISO 9001. A lot of these frameworks have a lot of just general best practice in terms of performing and managing a risk assessment that you could use for your AI systems as well. But now there are a few nuances when it comes to AI, and Jim covered a couple of those in terms of the threat modeling and making sure that the results are accurate and fair and things like that. We'll cover them in a little bit more detail now as we talk about continuous monitoring. So firstly is like, and Jim kind of mentioned this, is you have to establish metrics that define what is considered trustworthy and accurate within your AI system. A couple of those metrics could be like what is considered correct predictions versus predictions that are considered incorrect. There are also some other metrics that you can identify, like making sure that the latency of the results is sufficient, that the AI systems are sufficiently up and running when you need them to be. And then also like what exactly are the explanations that are being generated, and if there are any sort of unexpected inputs and outputs that are happening within this AI system. Establishing those first metrics that you can continuously test throughout time is the first step to really continuous monitoring. And the next is implementing that real-time monitoring, making sure that you have logging enabled, making sure you have a way to analyze those inputs, outputs, that decision making to determine when there is an anomaly, and then determine, okay, what caused this anomaly? How frequently is this happening? Is there any way we can, make any changes here to improve the accuracy and fairness? And then next is reviewing like any sort of reported incidents or errors that occur within the AI system, monitoring how frequently these errors are occurring. What are the similarities of these errors to kind of, make sure that you're mitigating any sort of, issues that are happening with the AI system. And then implementing a dashboard that allows logging and monitoring to be facilitated a lot easier will really increase the chances of success in regards to your continuous monitoring system. And then monitoring feedback directly from users and developers is a great way to get a lot of that feedback that you need to accurately monitor these systems over time. Whether that's introducing a feedback mechanism to allow like users to submit when there's bugs, errors, or even if they just run into like an area where they could make a suggestion for the AI system, or if they receive any sort of unexpected responses, having that feedback mechanism is a great way for you to kind of track all of those and then measure what exactly is happening, and then make any sort of changes that you need in order to successfully introduce changes to those systems. And then another way to gather feedback in regards to the AI systems that you use is from the community. Implementing a process for reviewing reports in regards to, what are the latest AI risks from like thought leaders or through social forums and webinars is a good way to keep on top of the technology and any sort of changes that these generative AI organizations are making. And then taking all of these different feedback mechanisms, whether it's the logging from the dashboards, the user feedback mechanism where they're submitting bug reports, and then also through like your research, having a way to manage all of that feedback through a centralized mechanism is a good way for you to continuously monitor those changes, the metrics, and everything like that throughout the year. So yeah, continuous monitoring is probably one of the strongest and most important aspects of the risk management. Jim,
So
anything you want to cover there?
I was just gonna say, I would add on the feedback part, I think it's especially important with AI systems more than other systems, even if you're going for ISO 27001 or something like that. Specifically in regards to the fairness and bias concern. In other words, if you read the standards, one of the biggest mitigating controls that you can put in place in order to assure that your system is unbiased and fair is to have open and kind of continuously monitored feedback mechanisms, because it is the people using the AI systems that are going to be on the front lines, kind of the first to detect or suspect that recommendations may be incorrect or unfair or biased or whatever. And so there's a lot of stress on effective feedback mechanisms in these standards for that reason, because they're trying to avoid that bias and unfairness risk.
It makes sense, Jim. It's hard to tune an automated system perfectly to make sure you're getting all the feedback you need. So having some sort of mechanism for the actual users to report when they see things or have suggestions is a good way to get a lot of that feedback that you need. Cool. So the next section is in relation to using standards and different frameworks to help implement not only a strong AI system, but we'll also be talking about some sort of different cybersecurity and privacy frameworks as well. So here's where we kind of deep dive all of the different AI frameworks that are out there in the market. I'm not going to go too deep, but just kind of give you a quick overview of what these different frameworks are, how they kind of differentiate, and what you need to know in order to, determine which framework you should really be looking at first or working into your specific systems. So first, we'll talk about the NIST AI RMF, which is built by NIST and is available open source. There are four core functions of the Risk AI RMF. The first function is the govern function, which is generally what are the policies, processes, and procedures that you have in place related to the use of AI and the AI risks. And then also under govern is the accountability of that AI use. So making sure that your users and developers are meeting those policies and processes that you put in place, and there's accountability against them. Next is map, which is where you establish the context of the use of AI, categorization, and also determining the baseline and benchmarks for the performance of that AI. Measure, monitoring and evaluating those AI systems, gathering feedback on the performance. And then manage, which is where you respond to, prioritize, manage risks, risk treatment, and communications. Planning on how to handle incidents and negative impacts in regards to the risks also falls into that category as well. NIST AI RMF also kind of overlaps with a lot of general security best practices, such as incident response, risk management, as we've talked about plenty, and then also acceptable use and specific processes related around the use of AI systems. This framework is voluntary and also flexible. So since it's not regulatory or not a law, you don't need to meet this. It's also pretty flexible where you don't need to meet it for T from top to bottom, but basically implement it in a way that best suits your organization. Next is ISO 42001, which is also a framework designed for responsible development and use of AI systems. It revolves around an AIMS, which could be an extension of your existing ISMS program, which is for ISO 27001. So if you're already meeting 27001 or that's something you're interested in, 42001 is a great tack on where you can kind of implement all of those best practices that you have for 27001 into your AI systems as well. The key thing about 42001 is it's also voluntary, not a requirement, but it can be attested against. So you can have a third party perform an external audit, and then you'll receive a report and that can tell you how well or if you need to make any improvements in regards to your controls around AI. Next and last is the EU AI Act. This is mandatory for organizations that are introducing AI into the European market. The first set of regulations will be released next year, and that starts with the prohibitions of using AI that is considered unacceptable risk. All of those definitions are incredibly important. Unacceptable risks, I'll just go through a few examples. Unacceptable would be something like social scoring or some forms of biometric identification and the use of AI within there. There's high risk, which could impact the health, safety, fundamental rights of people, or the environment. Also has the highest level of restrictions in regards to like the use of AI for educational, critical infrastructure, employment, things like that. The other two categories are limited risk and minimal risk, which kind of fall into things like chatbots, or if you're using AI to do things like spam filters or games where the risk to public or society or something like that is much, much less limited. We can jump into the next slide. Now we're just going to cover some general privacy and cybersecurity frameworks. These are important because as we went through that graphic, you noticed that a lot of fundamental controls are also important for AI. So taking a look at some of these frameworks could also help in regards to your use of AI in a very effective and secure manner. Firstly, we'll talk about the privacy frameworks. GDPR, CCPA are two examples. What they do is they mandate privacy controls for your organizations that are handling personal data. If you're storing data in specific regions, these frameworks could be a requirement or law for you. So it's important that you do review, what region you're storing personal data from, making sure you're maintaining these frameworks. And then next is ISO 27001, which we covered a little bit. It's in regards to an ISMS, maintains controls about data security. It works really well with 42001. There's a lot of overlap there. And then there's multiple different industry frameworks, HIPAA, PCI, these are all very specific to certain industries. There's also frameworks that you can look into and maintain if you're not in any particular industry that requires a cybersecurity framework. Those are things like SOC 2, ISO 27001, CIS, or NIST 853. We can jump into the next section now.
So hopefully you're not overwhelmed at this point and you're really asking your question, okay, so where do I start? Because it's not all that complicated once you take a deep breath and step back a bit. So good segue from the standards that Mark just went over in that, the first step should be, based on where you are geographically, where your intended audience is geographically, which of those standards or regulations, make the most sense for you. In order to choose those frameworks, you probably need to familiarize yourself a little bit better. The NIST framework is downloadable for free. You do have to pay for the ISO 42001 standard. You can get that from ANSI in the United States, or from ISO. The currency is Swiss francs, but it converts for you. They're about, I don't know, $150 or something like that to download the standard. So download the standard, choose which framework you'd like to adhere to, understand the requirements. They're not that difficult to read, actually, if you take your time. They're actually pretty well put together. You then need to decide, okay, how far off are you? So the first thing you need to do is that gap assessment. You could even call it a risk assessment, truthfully. It's just getting your baseline, because you're already doing some things, you're probably doing some good things, probably not doing everything you need to do. And so the important thing is, well, what's the extent of the gaps? What's the nature of the gaps? Which of the gaps are most important to close, in what order? And that's going to come from the risk assessment part of it. Then once you do, when you start fixing these things, especially if you want to get certified, with an audit and you're going against ISO 42001, you need a way to organize all the evidence that you're actually doing these different things you're supposed to do. That's where a platform like SecureFrame comes in, because it's so good at, saying, okay, here's the requirements. How are you going to prove that? Where's the evidence? Download the evidence here. And then it makes the auditor's job all that much easier.
Yeah, I'll jump into the first section that we have here, which is in regards to data privacy and governance controls. We'll be talking about cybersecurity controls a little bit later. But these are data privacy controls that are fundamental. They can help you in order to maintain a secure AI system. We'll cover a few of these here. A lot of these are mentioned in the GDPR or the CPRA, CCPA, different privacy-related frameworks. But first is in regards to how you ingest and collect personal data. Making sure that you request consent or providing users a way to manage how their data is handled by your organization is usually a requirement. That's typically through like site banners or terms of services that you have with your users. And through that terms of service, you basically explain how that data is being used throughout its life cycle, and usually also require some sort of communication if those terms change after they've already been approved by the users that sign that terms of use. And next is, how do you manage this data securely? First is determining who is managing that data. Define who your roles and responsibilities are in relation to ensuring the user data is ingested, managed, and disposed of properly. And then also determining which data you're collecting is considered sensitive, or if there are multiple categories, classifying that data. Ensuring that sensitive user data is properly classified and differentiating that data between your other forms of data is going to help you understand and make sure that the sensitive user data is only being stored, processed, transmitted within the specified environments that you have as secured enclaves for that data. And then also minimizing the use of that data, making sure that that collected sensitive personal data is only used when necessary and is not transmitted, stored, processed for any unnecessary reason. And then the retention of that data is the last and also important bit, where you have a process for removing that data, whether it's at a defined period of time, or you have a workflow to have users request when that data should be removed from your systems, and then having a process for doing so at that point. We'll jump into cybersecurity controls next.
Yep. Thank you, Mark. Now, let's be clear. We're listing 3 categories of cybersecurity controls here. If you look at the Center for Internet Security, the CIS version 8.1 implementation groups, there are 18 different control families. So why did we choose these 3? We chose these 3 because these are the 3 that in our reading of the standards appear to be the ones of highest priority in terms of mitigating risk for AI systems specifically. So please don't misunderstand that if you take care of these 3, you're all set. If you go back to that diagram we did in the first place, we expect you to have a comprehensive cybersecurity control program in place. But as it relates to AI systems, these are 3 of particular importance. And I think you can see why. In terms of access control, you think about, what would be the risk if you had lax access controls to your underlying data that your AI system depended on, or to the rules engine that your AI system depended on. So obviously you want to have very tight access control. Again, remember I was talking about the different roles that people have. So you want to have role-based access control. Only give people access to the different aspects of the system that they absolutely need to have in order to do their job. Multi-factor authentication is an absolute must, for AI systems, for all people, really, from users on up. It doesn't matter. In our opinion, you should not deploy an AI system without strong multi-factor authentication. Logging and monitoring, again, is not optional. If you look at the EU AI Act, that's legislation. That's not a suggested standard. It is super clear the level of monitoring, the level of logging that you must have in place. As we said before, if you don't know what's going on with your AI system, how can you assure that it's making good recommendations in a fair and unbiased manner? So it's sort of self-explanatory, self-evident that logging and monitoring would have to be, a critical control that you have well established. And then finally, incident response. An incident response in this case, in the case of AI systems, it's a little bit broader than just someone trying to break into your system. You could look at, even a report of a biased finding as an incident, right? And so, especially in the EU with GDPR, et cetera, they're very much about response processes, response to consumers, et cetera. And so this is incident response needs to take on a broader definition when it comes to AI systems. And it's not just that, a bad guy broke into your system. This is you responding to feedback from users as well.
Great. We'll jump into now, why should you focus on security and compliance in terms of your AI system? And Jim, I'd love to hear your opinion on this too, to see if we have any different viewpoints on this. But basically, what I'm seeing in the market is, as we're, secure frame, as we reach out and have calls with prospects, they're asking us about not just how the AI in our system works, but how is it implemented securely? And I think this is turning into a big conversation now. Now that AI has been into the market for a couple of years and it has really embedded itself into software and solutions, the next question is, it's not just how is AI being used in these systems, it's how is it being used securely? Because now everybody is kind of understanding that there are risks related to the use of AI. So why should organizations go through this process? I think the first one is just proving that the customer's data or that prospect's data is a priority to you. Having a third-party organization audit your cybersecurity environment, and then generate a report stating that you are implementing these systems effectively, is a great way to prove to your customers and your prospects that you're handling their data in a secure manner. And what that does is it helps you move through these deal cycles faster, where instead of having to explain how you may have some things in place, being able to present a report that has the controls that you've implemented in relation to these systems that you have established, is a great way to answer a lot of your prospects' questions in relation to your cybersecurity best practices. And this is also now, like I mentioned, becoming a requirement. It's not really just like a nice to have anymore. A lot of prospects, especially as you move up market, like maybe startups, or now it's like smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses, are a lot more concerned about the security of the solutions that you have in place as a third-party vendor or service provider to these organizations, because your customers are have to maintain their own security as well. And part of that is doing due diligence against you and making sure that you have these security controls in place. And then implementing AI securely is becoming incredibly important. It's on the forefront of all of our prospects' questions, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing it a lot as well. Now, having a risk management program is going to put you ahead of that race. A lot of these organizations have just implemented AI and they're just reading about these frameworks. And if you're able to kind of kick off that risk management process and that start going down into NIST AI, RMF, ISO 42001, that's going to get you a head start. And then once you get it tested against 42001, that's going to put you in the lead in terms of some of your competitors who might not have that same attestation stating that they're handling customer data as securely and effectively as you are. And then, like I kind of mentioned, competing up market, as you talk to these bigger and bigger companies, they're going to be asking you for specialized security frameworks to prove that you are implementing these controls effectively, or they could be sending you security questionnaires where you have to go through a list of control questions and explain how you have these things implemented. There are ways to kind of potentially even bypass these security questionnaires by going through these audits and being able to prove that, you've gone through a rigorous audit. It covers all of the controls in these questionnaires, and that can help you stand out and even, get to the lead in terms of some of these deals that you're working through. So using basically, security can be your competitive advantage when it comes to these deals and sales cycles, especially when we're talking about technology that's so new as AI. Being on the forefront of AI security can really help you stand out there.
Mark, I'm glad you emphasized supply chain risk management and third-party risk management in regards to these systems, because that's really critical. That's become more of an emphasis, for instance, with the Department of Defense lately. When they talk about a software bill of materials as a requirement for any systems developed for them. But what's interesting in that regard is the majority of our customers that we're helping with either ISO 42001 or the NIST AI risk management framework are not what I would call end deployers of AI systems, but they are companies that are developing AI systems for their customers. So in other words, they do the AI systems development process according to the standard, and it's almost like their customers want like that underwriter's laboratory seal, the equivalent of the underwriter's laboratory seal on this product that comes out of our customer's system before it gets delivered to their customer. So, I think that supply chain management is very apropos to what we're talking about here.
Makes a lot of sense to me, Jim. I think like one of the first things you need to do is determine where you sit in terms of this AI landscape. Like if you're, generating a lot of the pooled, like kind of data sets for these AIs, if you're just deploying aspects of AI within your system, or if you're just a general user of a Gen AI product, you're still, you sit in this supply chain in terms of
Somewhere, yeah.
exactly like and how you use these vendors is going to be incredibly important when you try and move through ISO 42001 or any of these AI frameworks.
Don't make assumptions about the systems that you're using.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I think we got one more slide. Yep. So we've tried very hard to make this an objective and informative presentation for you, keep the commercial part out of it. And so we just wanted to indulge you with one slide with a little bit more about SecureFrame and Trava. We are partners with each other. We work together in a very collaborative fashion. It's from a customer's perspective, it's almost like an integrated service, if you will. What Trava does is we are the compliance advisory or compliance as a service experts, but we need a platform on which to do that. That platform is SecureFrame. So Mark, tell us a little bit about how that works from your perspective.
Yeah, we're a platform that helps you organize all of the evidence, the controls. We even integrate within your vendor technology stack to ensure that configurations are set properly in relation to a lot of these compliance frameworks. So, what that means in layman's terms is you may be an organization and you don't have a compliance expert on your staff. Maybe you don't even have a cybersecurity person on staff. You could be the CEO and founder that's trying to figure all of this out. SecureFrame, we turn those complicated, convoluted framework requirements into tasks, bite-sized tests that are all in relation to the technology you integrate, the personnel that you invite to our platform, and make it an intuitive process for you to be able to go through these frameworks step by step. And then you have your compliance advisor, Trava, to be able to make sure that you're prioritizing these tasks effectively, to make sure that you're implementing these configuration changes effectively, and you're doing things in the most effective manner possible, to the point where you're going to go to audit and you're going to be fully prepared for some of these assessments. So I know we talked in detail about a lot of these frameworks, and it may seem pretty complicated, which it can be if you go and just download the regulatory material. But with our help, we've gotten many customers through these audits who might not have that expertise on staff.
Yeah. Secure Frame plus Trava is really the easy button for you in regards to this. Just one more example. If you wanted to be certified to the ISO 42001 standard before the external audit will start their external audit, you have to turn over your internal audit report. Most of our customers are too small to have an internal audit function, so Trava does that internal audit for you. Just one example of how we collectively, Secure Frame plus Trava, get you absolutely ready for that audit, and you will pass.
All right, so that brings us to the end of today's presentation. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to ask. You can use these QR codes to reach out to Trava or Secure Frame. But Mark and Jim, before I let you two go, I know we covered a lot of information, but is there something else you would like to talk about or really make sure that the viewers understand before heading out today? Jim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I would go back to my do not pass go, do not collect $200. If you don't understand the source and the quality management of your data, you're not ready to talk about building an AI system.
Yeah, my thing is you might already have built that AI system, and now we're just trying to go in reverse and try and make sure that we've done it correctly.
Oh my God,
right?
what did we do?
Exactly. Honestly, if you don't know where to begin, feel free to reach out to Jim and myself. Like we'll be more than happy to jump on a call, answer some emails in relation to any questions that you might have, and really get you started. That might be the hardest part. It could seem like this giant effort, and you might already have AI in place, and it's like, okay, how do I reverse and go back? So if you do have questions about where to begin, feel free to reach out to both of us. My QR code is right here. My email is mark@secureframe.com. Feel free to shoot me an email if you do have any questions.
All right, Mark and Jim, thanks so much for your knowledge. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, Jar.
Bye.